Honey, I'm about to tell you something I've never told anyone. Not my kids, not my pastor, not my sisters, not a single living soul on this earth. Because some secrets are so heavy, so shameful, so earth-shattering, that you bury them deep and pray to God nobody ever digs them up. But I'm 70 years old now, and I'm tired of carrying this weight. I was married for 44 years. 44 years to a deacon of the First Baptist Church of Mobile, Alabama. A man everybody in town respected. A man who prayed before every meal, read his Bible every single night, and shook hands with the pastor like they were brothers in Christ. And for 44 of those years, every single one of them, he never once touched me the way a husband is supposed to touch his wife. He said it was diabetes, said the disease had taken that from him, said I should accept it as God's will, as a cross we had to bear together in holy matrimony. And I believed him. For 44 years, honey, I believed every single word that came out of that man's mouth, until he died, and I found the letters. And what I read in those letters, Lord have mercy. It changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my family, about my whole entire life. My name is Dorothy, but everybody calls me Dot. I'm 70 years old now. I live in Mobile, Alabama, and this story is going to make you question everything you think you know about the person sleeping next to you. But before I start, do me a favor, sweetheart. Hit that like button down there and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I want to know where all my sisters are. Whether you're in Texas, Florida, Georgia, California, or anywhere else in this big, beautiful country, I want to hear from you. All right. Let's go. Because, honey, this is going to be one hell of a ride. I was born and raised right here in Mobile, Alabama. Deep South, Baptist family, the whole 9 yards. Church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday Bible study, and vacation Bible school every summer until I was old enough to teach it myself. My mama was a woman of few words, but the words she did say, she meant. And the thing she said most often was this: Dorothy Ann, a woman's job is to serve her husband, keep her house clean, and keep her mouth shut. That's God's order. Don't you ever forget it. And I didn't forget it. I carried those words with me like gospel truth for the next 60 years of my life. My daddy worked at the paper mill until his back gave out. After that, he sat in his recliner, watched TV, and waited for Mama to bring him his dinner. She never complained. Not once. That's just how it was. I had 2 sisters, both older than me. They got married young, moved away, had babies. I was the quiet one, the shy one, the one who stayed home and helped Mama with the cooking and the cleaning while I waited for my own Prince Charming to show up. And when I was 23 years old, at a church picnic down by the river, he finally did. His name was Harold Eugene Patterson. He was 25 years old, tall, clean-shaven, with the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He wore a white button-down shirt, pressed khaki pants, and he held the door open for me when I went to get more sweet tea from the cooler. "After you, ma'am," he said, and the way he said it, so polite, so gentlemanly, made my heart flutter like a hummingbird. We talked for an hour that afternoon. He told me he worked as a mechanic at his uncle's shop, that he'd been baptized at 12 years old, that he wanted a wife and children and a little house with a yard where he could build a workshop. He was everything my mama told me to look for in a man: God-fearing, hard-working, respectful. When I told Mama about him that night, she smiled and said, "Sounds like a good Christian man, Dorothy. Don't let that one get away." So I didn't. Harold and I courted for 3 months. He took me to church, took me to Waffle House after Sunday service, took me for drives along the bay. He never once tried anything inappropriate, never even kissed me until the night he proposed. And when he got down on one knee in my mama's living room with a tiny diamond ring that probably cost him a month's salary, I said yes before he even finished the question. We got married 6 weeks later at First Baptist Church. I wore my mama's wedding dress, altered to fit. Harold wore a rented suit. The whole congregation came. Pastor Williams said we were a beautiful example of Christian love. I was a virgin, of course, saving myself for my wedding night, just like a good Baptist girl should. I was nervous, excited, scared, all the things a bride is supposed to feel. That night, we checked into a little motel outside of town. Nothing fancy, just a clean room with a double bed and a TV that barely worked. I changed into the white nightgown my sister had given me, the one with the lace trim, and I waited for my husband to come to me. And I waited, and I waited. Harold came out of the bathroom in his pajamas, kissed me on the forehead, and said, "Good night, Dot." Then he turned off the light and went to sleep. I laid there in the dark for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. Was I not pretty enough? Had I said something to upset him? Was he just tired from the wedding? I told myself it was nerves, first night jitters, perfectly normal. Tomorrow would be different. But tomorrow wasn't different. Neither was the next day, or the next week, or the next month. Every night, Harold would kiss me on the forehead, say goodnight, and roll over to his side of the bed. And every night, I would lay there wondering what was wrong with me. After a year of marriage, I finally got the courage to ask him. We were sitting at the kitchen table, eating the pot roast I'd made for dinner. I'd rehearsed the words in my head 100 times, but they still came out shaky and small. "Harold, honey, is everything okay? With us, I mean. In the bedroom?" He put down his fork, looked at me with those gentle brown eyes, and sighed. "Dot, I've been meaning to talk to you about this. I went to the doctor last month. He says I've got diabetes, bad diabetes, and it affects a man's ability to perform." I felt my heart crack right down the middle. "So you can't, ever?" The doctor says probably not. "I'm sorry, Dot. I know this isn't what you signed up for, but it's God's will. We have to accept it." I started crying right there at the dinner table. Not because I was angry at him. I wasn't. I was heartbroken. Heartbroken for him, for us, for the children we might never have, for the life I'd imagined that was crumbling before it even started. Harold came around the table and held me, told me it would be okay, told me we'd find other ways to be close, told me that marriage was about more than just that. And I believed him, because he was my husband, because he was a good Christian man, because I didn't know any better. I wiped my tears, cleaned up the dishes, and went to bed next to the man I'd promised to love for better or worse. I had no idea that worse was only just beginning. The next few years, I poured all my energy into making our house a home. I cooked, I cleaned, I decorated, I planted flowers in the front yard. I joined the women's ministry at church, volunteered for every potluck and bake sale, made myself useful in every way I knew how. Because if I couldn't be a wife in that way, at least I could be a good wife in every other way. And Harold? Harold seemed happy enough. He went to work, came home, ate dinner, watched TV, went to church on Sundays. He was kind to me, gentle, never raised his voice. By all appearances, we had a good marriage, a quiet marriage, a passionless marriage, but a good one. Or so I thought. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Dot, if he couldn't perform, how in the world did you have 3 children? That's a fair question, and the answer is complicated. See, Harold wasn't completely unable. Every once in a while, and I mean once in a blue moon, he could manage something. It wasn't what you'd call intimacy. It wasn't romantic. It was more like a chore. Something he did with his eyes closed and his jaw clenched, like he was trying to get through it as fast as possible. The first time it happened, about 2 years into our marriage, I thought maybe things were getting better. Maybe the doctors had been wrong. Maybe God was healing him. But afterward, he got out of bed without a word, went to the bathroom and stayed in there for almost an hour. When he came out, his eyes were red like he'd been crying. "I'm sorry, Dot," he said. "That was hard for me. Please don't expect it again anytime soon." And I didn't. I learned not to expect anything. I learned to be grateful for the crumbs he threw my way once or twice a year, just enough to keep the marriage looking normal from the outside. That's how we had our children. Harold Eugene Patterson Jr., everybody calls him HJ, was born in 1985. Then came Betsy in 1988 and little Tommy in 1991. 3 children. 3 miracles, I called them. Because that's what they felt like, given the circumstances. I threw myself into motherhood the way a drowning person grabs a life raft. Finally, I had a purpose. Finally, I had someone to love who loved me back, without conditions, without complications. Those babies needed me, and Lord knows I needed them. When Tommy started kindergarten, I got a job at the Walmart on Airport Boulevard. Started as a cashier, minimum wage, standing on my feet 8 hours a day, scanning groceries and making small talk with strangers. I worked there for 32 years. 32 years of, did you find everything you needed today? 32 years of beeping barcodes and paper or plastic. 32 years of wearing that blue vest and name tag that said, Dorothy, happy to help. I moved up to customer service for a while, handling returns and complaints. But then they brought in younger managers with college degrees, and I got moved back to the registers. I didn't complain. That's not what good Christian women do. I'd come home after my shift with my feet aching and my back screaming, and I'd cook dinner for Harold and the kids. Fried catfish on Fridays, meatloaf on Mondays, pot roast on Sundays after church. I kept that house cleaner than a hospital room. I ironed Harold's shirts, packed the kids' lunches, helped with homework, drove to soccer practice and piano lessons and church youth group. And every night, I'd climb into bed next to a man who patted my hand, said, "Good night, Dot," and turned his back to me. For 44 years, that was my life. Work, cook, clean, church, sleep, repeat. I used to look at other couples sometimes, at the grocery store, at church, at the kids' school events, and wonder what it felt like to have a husband who looked at you like you were beautiful, who held your hand in public, who couldn't wait to get you alone. I wouldn't know. I never knew. By the time we'd been married 10 years, Harold had become a deacon at First Baptist Church. If you're not from the South, let me explain what that means. A deacon isn't just a church member. He's a leader, a pillar of the community, the man other men look up to, the one who visits the sick, who counsels the struggling, who prays over the congregation with authority and reverence. Harold took to it like a duck to water. Suddenly, everybody in Mobile knew Brother Harold. He organized the church potlucks, led the men's prayer breakfast every Tuesday morning, coordinated the annual fish fry fundraiser. Pastor Williams called him one of God's finest servants, and I was proud of him. I really was. Whatever was missing in our private life, at least my husband was doing good in the world. At least he was serving the Lord. At least people respected him. Every Sunday, we'd sit in the third pew from the front, Harold, me, and the kids all in a row. The picture-perfect Baptist family. People would smile at us, shake Harold's hand, tell me how lucky I was to have such a godly man. "You sure are blessed, Dot," the church ladies would say. "Brother Harold is such a good husband." And I'd smile and nod and say, "Yes, ma'am, I sure am blessed." Because what else could I say? That my godly husband hadn't touched me in 3 years? That I cried myself to sleep at night wondering what was wrong with me? That I felt more alone in my marriage than I ever did when I was single? No. Good Christian women don't say those things. Good Christian women smile and count their blessings and keep their mouths shut. So that's what I did. Now, I need to tell you about Jimmy Ray Dawson. Jimmy Ray was Harold's best friend since high school. They grew up together, played football together, got baptized in the same river the same summer. When Harold and I got married, Jimmy Ray was the best man. He was a good-looking fellow. I'll give him that. Tall, dark hair, easy smile. He owned a little hardware store on the west side of town. Dawson's Hardware, been in his family for 3 generations. Everybody knew Jimmy Ray. Everybody liked him. He got married too, a few years after us. His wife was a quiet woman named Linda, who sang in the church choir. They never had children. Linda always said it was God's plan, but there was a sadness in her eyes whenever she held someone else's baby. Harold and Jimmy Ray stayed close through the years. Thick as thieves, my mama would have said. They'd talk on the phone almost every day, meet up for lunch at the Waffle House, help each other with projects around the house. And every Saturday, like clockwork, Harold would go over to Jimmy Ray's place. Men's fellowship, he called it. Said they'd watch football, drink sweet tea, talk about the Lord and life and whatever else men talk about when women aren't around. Every single Saturday for 40 years. I never questioned it. Why would I? It was nice that Harold had a friend. It was healthy for men to have brotherhood, the pastor always said. Iron sharpens iron and all that. Sometimes I'd ask Harold what they talked about, just making conversation. He'd shrug and say, "Oh, you know, guy stuff. You wouldn't be interested." And I'd let it go, because I trusted him, because he was a deacon, because I had no reason to think anything was wrong. 40 years of Saturdays, honey. Every single week, my husband drove across town to spend the afternoon with his best friend. And I never once suspected a thing. Linda, Jimmy Ray's wife, passed away in 2015. Cancer took her quick, diagnosed in March, gone by July. Harold went to the funeral, of course, cried like a baby, said he was crying for Jimmy Ray's loss, for the pain his best friend was going through. After that, the Saturday visits got longer. Harold would leave after breakfast and not come home until almost dark. He said Jimmy Ray was struggling, that he needed company, that it was his Christian duty to be there for his friend in his time of grief. I believed him. Of course I believed him. "You're such a good friend to him, Harold," I'd say. "Jimmy Ray is lucky to have you." Harold would just nod and change the subject. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I missed. The way Harold's eyes lit up when Jimmy Ray walked into a room. The way they'd finish each other's sentences. The way Jimmy Ray looked at Harold sometimes when he thought nobody was watching, like Harold hung the moon and stars. But I didn't see it then. I was too busy being a good wife, a good mother, a good church member, too busy surviving to notice that my whole life was built on a lie. The years kept passing. The kids grew up, moved out, started lives of their own. HJ became a construction foreman, married a nice girl from Birmingham, had 2 kids. Betsy went to nursing school, works at the hospital now. Tommy moved to Atlanta, does something with computers that I don't really understand. Suddenly, it was just me and Harold in that house. The house I'd cleaned for 40 years, the bed I'd slept in alone, even with a husband beside me. We were like roommates by then, polite strangers who shared meals and went to church together. He watched his shows, I watched mine. He read his Bible, I read my romance novels, the only place I ever found the passion my real life was missing. I was 68 years old. I'd accepted that this was my life, that I'd die never knowing what it felt like to be truly loved by a man. And then, on a Tuesday morning in April, Harold had a heart attack right there in our kitchen. I called 911. I did CPR like they taught me in that class at church years ago. I prayed harder than I'd ever prayed in my life. But by the time the ambulance got there, he was gone. My husband of 44 years, dead on the kitchen floor. And honey, I had no idea that his death was just the beginning of my nightmare. The funeral was on a Saturday. Isn't that something? Harold spent every Saturday of his life with Jimmy Ray, and now we were burying him on a Saturday too. First Baptist Church was packed to the rafters. I mean packed, honey. People standing in the back, people in the overflow room watching on the TV screen, people lined up outside in the parking lot because there wasn't room for everybody inside. That's how loved Harold Eugene Patterson was in Mobile, Alabama. I sat in the front pew with my children on either side of me. HJ on my left, Betsy on my right, Tommy next to her. We were all dressed in black, all holding hands, all trying to hold it together, while Pastor Williams talked about what a great man my husband was. Brother Harold was one of God's finest servants, the pastor said, his voice echoing through the sanctuary. A devoted husband, a loving father, a faithful deacon, a man who lived his life according to the Word and never wavered in his commitment to the Lord. I listened to those words and felt nothing. That's the honest truth. I should have been devastated. I should have been sobbing like the other widows I'd seen at funerals over the years. But I just sat there, numb, like I was watching the whole thing happen to somebody else. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe 44 years of emotional starvation had drained me of the ability to grieve properly. Or maybe, deep down in a place I didn't want to examine, there was a tiny part of me that felt relieved. I pushed that thought away as soon as it came. What kind of Christian woman feels relieved when her husband dies? What kind of monster was I? The testimonials went on for almost an hour. Church members stood up one after another to talk about how Brother Harold had touched their lives, how he'd visited them in the hospital, how he'd prayed with them during hard times, how he'd helped them move furniture or fix their cars or find jobs. Saint Harold, that's what they were describing, a saint in mechanics' coveralls. And then Jimmy Ray stood up. I watched him walk to the podium, this man I'd known for over 40 years, this man who'd been at every Christmas dinner, every birthday party, every backyard barbecue. He was wearing a black suit that looked brand new, and his eyes were red and swollen like he'd been crying for days. He had been crying for days. I'd seen him at the visitation the night before, barely able to stand, having to be held up by his nephew. I'd thought at the time that it was beautiful, in a sad way. Such deep friendship between two men. Such a loss. Now Jimmy Ray stood at that podium, gripping the edges like it was the only thing keeping him upright, and he started to speak. "Harold Patterson was my best friend for 50 years, he said, his voice cracking on almost every word. We grew up together. We dreamed together. We shared everything." He paused, took a shaky breath. "I don't know how I'm supposed to live without him. I really don't. He was the other half of me." And then he broke down completely, sobbing at the podium in front of 300 people, unable to continue. His nephew had to come up and lead him back to his seat. The congregation murmured with sympathy. "Poor Jimmy Ray," I heard someone whisper behind me. "Losing his best friend like that. They were like brothers." Like brothers. Yes, that's what I thought too. I reached over and squeezed HJ's hand. My son looked like he was barely holding it together. He'd always been close to his daddy, or the man he thought was his daddy. They'd worked on cars together, gone fishing together, watched football together every Sunday afternoon after church. But I noticed something that day that I'd never really paid attention to before. The way Jimmy Ray looked at HJ, across the church. The way his eyes lingered on my son's face, with an expression I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just grief. It was something else, something deeper. I filed that observation away in the back of my mind and forgot about it. I had a husband to bury. We buried Harold in the church cemetery under a big oak tree, next to a plot I'd eventually occupy myself. Pastor Williams said some final words. We threw dirt on the casket, and it was done. 44 years of marriage ended with a handful of Alabama clay. The reception was at the church fellowship hall. Casseroles and fried chicken and sweet tea and pecan pie, because that's how we do death in the South. You eat, you hug, you tell stories about the deceased, you go home and collapse. I stood by the door for 2 hours, accepting condolences from people whose names I barely remembered. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Dot. He was such a good man, Dot. If you need anything at all, you just call me, Dot." I smiled and nodded and thanked everyone, just like I'd been doing my whole life, playing the role, wearing the mask, good Christian widow, grieving appropriately. Jimmy Ray came through the line near the end. He took both my hands in his, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Dot, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." There was something in his voice that struck me as odd. Not just grief, something that sounded almost like guilt? But I was exhausted and overwhelmed, and I didn't have the energy to analyze it. I just squeezed his hands back and said, "Thank you, Jimmy Ray. I know how much he meant to you." He flinched. Just slightly, just for a second. Then he nodded and moved on. The kids stayed with me for a few days after the funeral. They helped with thank you notes, they answered phone calls, they made sure I ate something besides crackers and coffee, but eventually they had to get back to their own lives. HJ had a job site to manage. Betsy had shifts at the hospital. Tommy had to fly back to Atlanta. By the end of the week, I was alone in that house for the first time in 44 years. And honey, the silence was deafening. I'd lived in that house since 1981, raised 3 children there, cooked 10,000 meals in that kitchen, washed 10,000 loads of laundry in that basement. But without Harold's presence, even the distant, disconnected presence I'd grown used to, the house felt like a tomb. I wandered from room to room, not sure what to do with myself. I'd taken bereavement leave from Walmart, so I didn't have work to distract me. The church ladies brought food every day, but they never stayed long. Everyone assumed I wanted to be alone with my grief. They were wrong. I didn't want to be alone. I'd been alone my entire marriage. I was sick to death of being alone. But I didn't know how to say that. Didn't know how to ask for help. So I just existed. Moved through the days like a ghost in my own life. About a week after the funeral, I decided it was time to start cleaning out Harold's things. It felt wrong somehow, disrespectful. But the grief counselor at church said it could be healing to go through a loved one's belongings, said it could help with closure. I started with the easy stuff, his clothes. 40 years of button-down shirts and khaki pants and church suits, all hanging neatly in his side of the closet. I folded them carefully, put them in garbage bags for goodwill. Some other man could use them. Then I moved to his dresser. Underwear, socks, handkerchiefs, nothing interesting, nothing personal. His nightstand had a Bible, a pair of reading glasses, and a bottle of antacids. That's it. That's all my husband kept beside his bed for 44 years. The bathroom was next. I threw away his toothbrush, his razor, his Old Spice aftershave that had been the same scent since 1980. The smell of it made me cry for the first time since he died. Not because I missed him exactly, just because it was familiar, just because it was ending. On the 10th day, I finally worked up the courage to go into the garage. The garage was Harold's domain, his workshop, his sanctuary. He'd spent hours out there every evening, tinkering with engines, building birdhouses, listening to gospel radio. I rarely went in there. It was his space, and I respected that. But now it was just a room full of tools that nobody would ever use again. I walked through slowly, running my fingers over the workbench, the pegboard covered with wrenches and screwdrivers, the old radio that was still tuned to WLVV. Everything was exactly where Harold had left it. His toolbox sat in the corner, a big red metal toolbox that his daddy had given him when he turned 18. He'd had that thing longer than he'd had me. I knelt down and opened it, not sure what I was looking for. Just going through the motions, I guess. Just trying to feel close to a man who'd never let me get close to him in life. The top tray was full of the usual stuff, wrenches, pliers, screwdrivers. I lifted it out and set it aside. The second tray had more tools, socket sets, electrical tape, wire cutters, and then I noticed something strange. The bottom of the toolbox looked wrong. The depth didn't match the outside. It was too shallow by at least 2 inches. I felt around the edges and found a little notch, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. I pulled on it, and the false bottom lifted up. Underneath was a shoebox, an old shoebox, faded and worn, hidden in a secret compartment in my dead husband's toolbox. My heart started pounding. My hands started shaking. Some instinct told me that whatever was in that box was going to change everything. I should have put it back. Should have closed the toolbox and walked away and let the dead keep their secrets. But I didn't. I opened the box, and inside were letters. Dozens of them, maybe 100. Handwritten letters in envelopes, some of them yellowed with age, some of them newer. I picked up the first one. The handwriting was neat, careful, familiar somehow. I unfolded the paper and started to read. My dearest H. My dearest H, last Saturday was everything. I can still feel your hands on me, your breath on my neck, the way you whispered my name like a prayer. I know what we're doing is sin. I know what the Bible says. But when I'm with you, I feel closer to God than I ever do sitting in that church. How can something that feels so right be wrong? I count the days until Saturday. Every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. They're just waiting, just killing time until I can see you again, hold you again, be with you again. Linda suspects nothing. Dot suspects nothing. We're safe, my love. We're careful. Yours forever and always, J. I read that letter 3 times before my brain could process what my eyes were seeing. J. The letter was signed J. Jimmy Ray, my husband's best friend, the man who'd stood up at our wedding, the man who'd cried harder than anyone at Harold's funeral, the man who'd been coming to my house for 40 years, eating my cooking, shaking my hand, looking me in the eye while he was sleeping with my husband. I sat down hard on the cold concrete floor of the garage, letters spilling out of the shoebox onto my lap. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the paper. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of joke, some kind of mistake. Maybe Harold was holding these letters for someone else. Maybe Jay was someone different, some other person whose name started with J. But I knew. Deep in my bones, I already knew. I picked up another letter. This one was dated 1987, 2 years after HJ was born. My darling Harold, I saw our boy today. Dot brought him to the hardware store to pick up some nails for that fence you're building. He's getting so big, H, and he looks just like me. Those eyes, that chin. He's mine, and everyone can see it except the people who don't want to look. I know we agreed that he'd be yours on paper, that it was safer that way, that nobody could ever know, but sometimes it's so hard. I want to hold him and tell him I'm his daddy. I want to teach him to throw a ball, to ride a bike, to be a man. But I can't, because of what we are, because of what this world would do to us if they knew. So I'll just be Uncle Jimmy, the family friend, the man who shows up at birthdays and Christmas with presents that are always a little too nice, a little too thoughtful. It's not enough, H. It'll never be enough, but it's all we've got. I love you. I love him. I love what we've built, even if it's built on lies. Yours, J. I dropped the letter like it had burned me. Our boy, he's mine. Those eyes, that chin. H.J. Harold Jr., my firstborn son. He wasn't Harold's child. He was Jimmy Ray's. I don't know how long I sat on that garage floor. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. The light changed, got dimmer, but I didn't move. Couldn't move. I just sat there surrounded by 40 years of love letters between my husband and his lover. His lover. My husband had a lover, a man, for 40 years. All those Saturdays, all those men's fellowship afternoons. All those times Harold came home late smelling like soap, like he'd just taken a shower. I thought he was just being clean, just washing off the sweat from working in Jimmy Ray's yard. He was washing off Jimmy Ray. I felt sick. Actually, physically sick. I crawled to the corner of the garage and vomited into a trash can, heaving until there was nothing left, until I was just making sounds, just crying and retching and trying to breathe. 44 years. 44 years of marriage, and it was all a lie. He never loved me. He never wanted me. I was just... What? A cover story? A beard? A convenient excuse so nobody would ask questions about the bachelor mechanic who spent all his time with his best friend? And what about me? What about my life, my youth, my body that nobody ever touched, my heart that nobody ever wanted? I gave him everything, everything I had. I cooked for him, cleaned for him, raised his children. No, not his children. One of them wasn't even his. I gave up my dreams, my desires, my entire existence to be his wife. And the whole time, the whole goddamn time, He was sneaking around with Jimmy Ray Dawson. The diabetes was a lie. The impotence was a lie. He could perform just fine, just not with me, not with a woman, because he didn't want women. He wanted men. He wanted Jimmy Ray. And he let me believe I was the problem. He let me cry myself to sleep for decades, wondering what was wrong with me, why my husband didn't want me, why God had cursed me with a broken marriage. It wasn't God. It was Harold. Harold and his lies and his secret life and his 40 years of Saturdays. I started reading more letters. I couldn't stop myself. It was like picking at a wound, knowing it was going to hurt, doing it anyway. There were letters from every year of our marriage. 1981, 1982, 1983, all the way up to 2023, just a few months before Harold died. The handwriting changed over the decades, got shakier as they got older, but the content was the same. Love, longing, lust. Details I won't repeat, honey, because some things are too private even for a story like this. But I'll tell you this much. Those letters made it clear that Harold and Jimmy Ray had a full, passionate, physical relationship. Everything Harold denied me for 44 years, he was giving to another man every Saturday afternoon. Every single Saturday, while I was at home cooking dinner, while I was at Walmart scanning groceries, while I was at church praying for my marriage to get better. They were together. One letter in particular stopped me cold. It was from 1985, right around the time HJ was conceived. I know what we did was risky. I know you have to keep up appearances with Dot, have to give her children so nobody asks questions. But knowing that you were with her, even just that once, it tears me apart. Promise me it won't happen again. Promise me that was the last time. I can't share you, H. Not that way. The rest of it I can handle. The marriage, the church, the lies. I can handle all of it as long as I know that part of you belongs only to me. She'll raise the baby thinking it's yours. And maybe that's for the best. But you and I will know the truth. We'll know that child was made because we needed a cover, needed a distraction, needed something to make everything look normal. I love you. I hate this. I love you anyway, Jay. Made because we needed a cover, needed a distraction. That's what HJ was to them. A distraction, a prop in their elaborate lie. And those other times, the rare occasions when Harold did come to me, when he did manage to perform, were those calculated too? Planned out between him and Jimmy Ray so I'd have just enough hope to keep from asking questions? I thought about Betsy, about Tommy. Were they Harold's biologically, or were they Jimmy Ray's too? I had no way of knowing without a DNA test. And did it even matter anymore? Did any of it matter? My whole family was built on lies. Every single brick. At some point, the sun went down completely and the garage went dark. I was still sitting on that cold floor, letters scattered all around me, tears dried on my cheeks. I should have gone inside, should have eaten something, drunk some water, called someone. But who would I call? What would I say? Hey, Betsy, just found out your daddy was gay, and your older brother might actually be your cousin because he was fathered by Uncle Jimmy? Hey, Pastor Williams, just discovered that your star deacon was living a double life for 40 years and I was too stupid to notice? No. I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I gathered up the letters, every single one of them, and put them back in the shoebox. Put the shoebox back in the false bottom of the toolbox. Closed the lid, walked inside, went to bed. I didn't sleep. I just lay there in the dark. In the bed I'd shared with a stranger for 44 years, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do next. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I got in my car and drove to Jimmy Ray Dawson's house. I didn't call ahead, didn't warn him I was coming. I just showed up on his doorstep at 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, with that shoebox tucked under my arm and 44 years of rage burning in my chest. I knocked on the door. When he opened it and saw my face, saw what I was holding, all the color drained right out of him. He went pale as a ghost, grabbed the doorframe for support, and said the only thing he could say, Oh God, Dot, you found them. And I looked that man dead in the eye, that man who'd eaten my potato salad at 100 church picnics, who'd sat in my living room on 100 Sunday afternoons, who'd lied to my face for 4 decades. And I said, "Tell me everything, and don't you dare leave anything out." Jimmy Ray stood there in his doorway, looking like a man who'd just seen his own death walking up the front steps. His face was gray, his hands were trembling, and his eyes kept darting from my face to the shoebox and back again, like he was hoping one of us would disappear. "Dot," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can explain. Can you?" I pushed past him into the house without waiting for an invitation. I'd been in this house 100 times over the years, for barbecues and birthday parties and Sunday afternoon visits. But now it looked different. Now I saw it for what it really was, the place where my husband had been living his real life while I waited at home like a fool. Jimmy Ray closed the door and followed me into the living room. The place was tidy, the way a man who lives alone keeps things tidy. Not dirty, but not really clean either. There were photos on the mantel, his wedding picture with Linda, a few shots of nieces and nephews, and right there in the center, in a silver frame, a picture of Harold. Just Harold. Smiling at the camera like he didn't have a care in the world. I picked up that frame and held it up. "How long did you have this out here? Did you wait until Linda died, or was it always here, right under her nose?" Jimmy Ray sank into his recliner like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. "It was in my bedroom," he said quietly, "until Linda passed. Then I moved it out here. I wanted to see him every day. First thing in the morning, last thing at night." "That's beautiful," I said, and the sarcasm in my voice could have cut glass. "That's real romantic, Jimmy Ray. Meanwhile, I spent 44 years wondering why my husband wouldn't touch me, wondering what was wrong with me, crying myself to sleep while he was over here, touching you." He flinched like I'd slapped him. "Dot, you don't understand." "Then make me understand." I threw the shoebox onto the coffee table between us. Letters spilled out, scattering across the wood like accusations. "You've got about 5 minutes before I drive to the church and show these to Pastor Williams. So I suggest you start talking." Jimmy Ray was quiet for a long moment. He stared at those letters like they were bombs about to go off. Then he took a deep breath and he started talking. "Harold and I, we knew what we were when we were 16 years old, maybe younger. We grew up together, you know that. Little League, Boy Scouts, youth group at First Baptist. We did everything together. And somewhere along the way, we realized that what we felt for each other was different from what other boys felt for their friends." He paused, rubbed his hands over his face. "You have to understand, Dot. This was 1970, Mobile, Alabama. You couldn't be what we were, not if you wanted to live, not if you wanted to keep your family, your job, your place in the community. Men like us back then, they got beaten, they got killed. They got sent away to those conversion camps where they'd try to pray the gay out of you. So you decided to hide," I said. "It wasn't a question. We decided to survive." He looked up at me, and there were tears in his eyes. "We made a plan. We'd both get married, both have normal lives, both be good Christian men that nobody would ever suspect. And we'd have our Saturdays. Just Saturdays. 1 day a week when we could be ourselves. For 40 years. For 40 years. Every Saturday, rain or shine, hell or high water. Harold would come over here, or I'd go to his shop when you were at work. And for a few hours, we'd pretend that we lived in a different world. A world where we could be together without hiding." I sat down on the couch across from him. My legs were shaking too much to keep standing. "And Linda? Did she know?" Jimmy Ray shook his head. "Not at first, but after about 20 years, I think she figured it out. She never said anything directly, but she stopped asking where I was going on Saturdays, stopped expecting me to be a husband to her in that way. We became roommates, friends even, but not married, not really. Just like me and Harold." just like you and Harold." I let that sit for a moment. 2 marriages, 2 women, 40 years of lies. "Tell me about HJ," I said finally. "Tell me the truth." Jimmy Ray closed his eyes. "Harold Jr. is my biological son." Even though I already knew it, hearing him say the words out loud hit me like a punch to the gut. "How?" He opened his eyes and looked at me with something like shame. "It was 1984. You and Harold had been married for 3 years, and people were starting to talk, asking when you were going to have children, wondering if something was wrong. Harold was scared. He thought if you didn't get pregnant soon, people would start asking questions, start looking at him differently." "So what? You just donated?" "It wasn't like that." Jimmy Ray shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Harold came to me and said he couldn't do it, couldn't be with you that way, not even once. He'd tried, he said, but he just couldn't. So he asked me if I would." He trailed off. "If you would what, Jimmy Ray? Say it." "If I would be with you instead, just once, just enough to give you a child." The room started spinning. I gripped the arm of the couch to keep from falling over. "You're telling me that you and I—" "One night," he said quickly, "Harold gave you something to help you sleep. Some kind of pill in your tea. You wouldn't remember, and I came over and I—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I remembered that night. Or rather, I remembered the morning after. I'd woken up feeling strange, groggy, like I was swimming through fog. And I was sore in places I shouldn't have been sore. When I mentioned it to Harold, he'd smiled and said, "Don't you remember, Dot? Last night we finally, the diabetes must be getting better." I'd been so happy, so relieved. I thought my husband had finally come back to me, that our marriage was finally going to be normal. I'd had no idea that it wasn't my husband at all. "You raped me," I said. My voice was flat, dead. "Both of you. You drugged me and raped me." "Dot, please, it wasn't like—" "It was exactly like that." I stood up, my whole body trembling. "You came into my bed while I was unconscious. You put a baby in me without my knowledge or consent, and then you let me raise that child for 43 years thinking he belonged to my husband. How is that not rape, Jimmy Ray? Tell me, how is that anything other than what it is?" He was crying now, full-on sobbing, tears running down his weathered cheeks. "I'm sorry, Dot. I'm so sorry. We were young and scared and stupid. We didn't think about what it would do to you. We just thought about ourselves, about keeping our secret, about surviving." "And what about Betsy? What about Tommy? Are they yours too?" He shook his head. "No, those were Harold. He managed somehow a couple of times. Said he closed his eyes and thought about me. It was the only way he could—" I held up my hand. "Stop. I don't want to hear any more." I stood in the middle of Jimmy Ray Dawson's living room, surrounded by 40 years of lies, and I felt something shift inside me. The grief, the shock, the horror. It was all still there. But underneath it, something else was rising up. Something hot and fierce and unfamiliar. Rage, pure, righteous, long overdue rage. "You stole my life," I said. "Both of you. You stole 44 years from me. Years I could have spent with someone who actually wanted me. Years I could have spent being happy, being loved, being touched by someone who saw me as more than a convenient disguise." "I know." Jimmy Ray's voice was broken. "I know, Dot. And if I could go back—" "But you can't. That's the thing, isn't it? You can't go back. I can't go back. Those years are gone. My youth is gone. My chance at a real marriage, a real family, a real life, it's all gone. And I'm standing here at 68 years old, finding out that my entire existence was a stage set for your love affair." I picked up the shoebox, gathered the scattered letters, and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Jimmy Ray asked, panic in his voice. What are you going to do?" I turned and looked at him one last time. "I don't know yet, but I'll tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to keep your secret anymore. I've been keeping secrets my whole life. Mine, Harold's, everybody's. I'm done. Whatever happens next, happens in the light." I walked out of that house and didn't look back. The drive home was a blur. I don't even remember the route I took or whether I stopped at red lights. My mind was somewhere else entirely, processing, calculating, trying to figure out what to do with this atomic bomb that had just been dropped into my life. I had 3 children. One of them wasn't Harold's. All of them had been raised on lies. I had 44 years of marriage. None of it was real. I had a dead husband, a man I thought I knew, a man I thought I loved, a man who turned out to be a complete stranger. And I had a choice to make. I could bury this, put the letters back in the toolbox, seal up the false bottom, and never speak of it again. Take the secret to my grave, just like Harold had planned to do. Let my children keep their memories of their father intact. Let the church keep their image of Brother Harold, the faithful deacon. Let everybody go on believing the lie. Or I could burn it all down. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I knew which one I was going to choose. I sat on the truth for 3 days. 3 days of walking around that house like a zombie, barely eating, barely sleeping, just staring at walls and replaying everything in my head. The letters. Jimmy Ray's confession. The night I couldn't remember. The son who wasn't my husband's. Part of me wanted to burn those letters and pretend I'd never found them. Just move on with my life, grieve Harold the way a normal widow grieves, and take the secret to my grave. It would be easier, cleaner. Nobody else would have to hurt. But I couldn't do it. Because I'd spent 44 years living in the dark, and I was done. I was done protecting men who'd used me. Done keeping secrets that weren't mine to keep. Done being the good Christian woman who smiles and stays quiet while her whole world burns. If my children were going to know their father, really know him, they deserved the truth, even if it destroyed everything they believed. I called all 3 of them and asked them to come over on Saturday. Told them I'd found some things while cleaning out their daddy's belongings, things we needed to discuss as a family. They probably thought it was about the will, or some old photographs, or maybe a storage unit nobody knew about. They had no idea what was coming. Betsy arrived first, around 10 in the morning. She'd brought a coffee cake from the Piggly Wiggly, because that's what you do in the South. You don't show up empty-handed, even to your own mama's house. "How are you holding up?" she asked, giving me a hug in the kitchen. "You sounded strange on the phone." "I'm all right," I lied, "just waiting for your brothers." Tommy got there next, having driven up from Atlanta the night before. He looked tired, rumpled, like he'd slept in his car. Probably had. Tommy was never good at planning ahead. "Hey, Mama." He kissed my cheek. "What's this all about?" "Let's wait for HJ." HJ was the last to arrive, pulling into the driveway in his big work truck around 11. He came through the front door the way he always did, loud and confident, filling up the room with his presence. "All right, Mama, we're all here," he said, settling into his daddy's old recliner like it belonged to him now. "What's going on? You find a secret bank account or something?" I looked at my 3 children, my babies, even though they were all grown now with gray in their hair and lines on their faces. I looked at Betsy with her kind eyes and her nurse's practicality, at Tommy with his tech job and his nervous energy, at HJ with his strong jaw and his confident smile, HJ who looked nothing like Harold, HJ who'd always looked more like... I took a deep breath. "There's no easy way to say this," I began. "So I'm just going to say it straight. I found some letters hidden in your daddy's toolbox. Love letters from Jimmy Ray Dawson." Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Betsy was the first to speak. "Love letters? What do you mean, love letters?" "I mean exactly what I said. Romantic letters, intimate letters, going back 40 years. Your daddy and Jimmy Ray were together. The whole time I was married to your father, he was having an affair with Jimmy Ray." Tommy's face had gone pale. "Mama, that can't be right. Daddy was a deacon. He was the most Christian man I ever knew. He wouldn't—" "He did." I pulled the shoebox out from beside my chair, where I'd hidden it under a blanket. "It's all here. Every letter, every confession, every detail. 40 years of lies." Betsy reached for the box with shaking hands. She pulled out a letter at random, started reading, and I watched her face change. Watched the disbelief turn to shock, then to something harder. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, Mama." Tommy took the letter from her, read it himself. Then another, then another. By the time he'd read the fourth one, he was crying. "I don't understand," he said. "How could he? All those years, and we never—" "None of us knew," I said. "That was the whole point. They planned it that way. Both of them got married, had families, looked normal to the outside world. And every Saturday, while I thought your daddy was at Jimmy Ray's house for men's fellowship, they were—" I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. HJ hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. He was still sitting in that recliner, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. "HJ?" I said softly. "Honey, are you okay?" "There's something else," he said. It wasn't a question. "You've got that look on your face, Mama. The look you get when you're about to tell me something I don't want to hear. So just say it." This was the moment I'd been dreading. The moment that had kept me up for 3 nights straight, pacing the floors, trying to find the right words. There were no right words. "There's a letter from 1985, I said. "The year you were born. In that letter, Jimmy Ray talks about you." HJ's jaw tightened. "What about me?" "He calls you our boy. He says he sees himself in your eyes. He says—" I had to stop, had to breathe, had to force the words out. "He says you're his son, HJ. Not your daddy's, his." The room went dead silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, a dog barking somewhere down the street. HJ didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there staring at me like I'd slapped him across the face. "That's not possible," he said finally. His voice was strange, hollow. "I'm Harold Patterson, Jr. I'm named after my father. I've got his name, his face, his—" "You don't have his face, honey." The words came out gentle, careful. "You never did. People always said you looked different from your daddy. They said you must take after my side of the family. But you don't look like my people either. You look like— don't say it. You look like Jimmy Ray." HJ stood up so fast the recliner nearly tipped over. "This is bullshit," he said. His voice was shaking now, anger mixing with something that might have been fear. "This is complete and total bullshit, Mama. You're telling me that my whole life, everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family, it's all a lie? That my father isn't my father? That Uncle Jimmy, the man who taught me to fish, who came to every single one of my birthday parties, who I thought was just a good family friend, he's actually my—" He couldn't say it either. "I know it's a lot to take in," I said. "I know—" "You don't know anything," HJ was shouting now. "You don't know what this is like. I'm 43 years old. I've got kids of my own. And you're telling me that my whole identity, everything I thought I was, is based on a lie?" "I'm telling you the truth," I said quietly. "For the first time in your life, someone is telling you the truth." He grabbed one of the letters out of Betsy's hand, read it himself. I watched his eyes move across the page, watched the blood drain from his face, watched his hands start to tremble. When he finished, he looked up at me with eyes that were wet and wild. "I need to go," he said. "HJ, please." "I need to go, Mama. I can't be here right now. I can't look at you. I can't look at these letters. I can't—" He was out the door before I could stop him. I heard his truck start up, heard the tires squeal as he backed out of the driveway too fast, heard him roar off down the street. And then he was gone. Betsy and Tommy stayed for another 2 hours. We talked. We cried. We read through more of the letters together, piecing together the timeline of Harold and Jimmy Ray's affair. 40 years of secrets, laid out in black and white. Betsy handled it better than I expected. She's a nurse. She's seen a lot of things, learned how to process shock and tragedy without falling apart. She held my hand and told me none of this was my fault, that I was a victim just as much as anyone else. "I'm so sorry, Mama," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." Tommy was quieter. He sat on the couch with his head in his hands, reading the same letter over and over again, like he was trying to make the words say something different. "I don't understand how he could do this," he said at one point. "I don't understand how someone could lie like that every single day for that long. Didn't he feel guilty? Didn't he feel anything?" "I think he felt a lot of things," I said. "I think he was scared and ashamed and trapped in a life he never wanted. But that doesn't excuse what he did to me. What they both did." "No," Tommy agreed. "It doesn't." Before they left, Betsy asked me what I was going to do with the letters. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "Part of me wants to burn them. Part of me wants to show them to Pastor Williams and let the whole church know what their precious brother Harold was really like." "What about Jimmy Ray?" Tommy asked. "Have you talked to him since?" "I went to see him right after I found the letters. He confirmed everything. He cried, he apologized, but honey, apologies don't give me back 44 years. Betsy nodded slowly. "And HJ? What's going to happen with him?" "That's up to him. I told him the truth. What he does with it is his choice. If he wants to talk to Jimmy Ray, get a DNA test, whatever, that's his decision to make. I'm done making decisions for other people. I spent my whole life doing what other people expected. From now on, I'm doing what's right for me." HJ didn't call that night, or the next day, or the next week. I'd reach out, leave voicemails, send texts. Nothing. Complete radio silence. Betsy said to give him time, said he was processing, that this was the kind of thing that took months or years to work through, not days. She said he'd come around eventually. But every day that passed without hearing from my son felt like another piece of my heart being carved out. I'd already lost my husband, or at least the illusion of the husband I thought I had. I'd lost my past, my memories, my sense of who I was. Was I going to lose my child too? 6 months went by. 6 months of silence from HJ, and then one morning, out of the blue, I got a text. "Got the DNA test results. You were right. I need to see you. Can I come over?" I stared at that message for a long time before I responded. "Of course, honey. Whenever you're ready." HJ showed up at my door on a Thursday afternoon. I barely recognized him. The man standing on my porch looked like he'd aged 10 years in 6 months. His face was thinner. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hair had gone grayer at the temples. He looked like a man who'd been to war and barely made it back. "Hey, Mama," he said quietly. I didn't say anything, just opened my arms and pulled him into a hug. He resisted for a second. That old Patterson stubbornness, or I guess I should say that old Dawson stubbornness. But then he collapsed into me. My 43-year-old son, this big, strong construction foreman who'd spent his whole life being tough, sobbed on my shoulder like he was 5 years old again. We stood there in the doorway for a long time. I didn't rush him, didn't ask questions, just held him and let him cry. When he finally pulled back, wiping his face with the back of his hand, I led him inside to the kitchen. I made coffee, set out some of the butter cookies he'd always loved as a boy, and sat down across from him at the table. "Tell me," I said. "Tell me everything." HJ stared into his coffee cup for a long moment before he started talking. After I left here that day, I drove around for hours. Just drove, not going anywhere, trying to make sense of what you'd told me. I kept thinking there had to be some mistake. That those letters were fake, or that Jimmy Ray was lying, or that somehow, someway, this wasn't real. He took a sip of coffee, grimaced like it was too hot, kept going anyway. But the more I thought about it, the more things started making sense. Things I'd never questioned before, like why I never looked like Daddy, why Jimmy Ray always paid so much attention to me, more than he did to Betsy or Tommy. Why he came to every single one of my ball games, every school play, every graduation. I thought he was just being a good family friend. But it wasn't that, was it? No, honey, it wasn't. He was watching his son grow up, from the sidelines, never able to say who he really was. I nodded. There was nothing else to say. H.J. set down his coffee cup and looked at me with those eyes, Jimmy Ray's eyes. I could see it so clearly now. I went to see him, Mama, Jimmy Ray, about 3 months ago. My heart clenched. And? It was... I don't even know how to describe it. I showed up at his house, ready to scream at him, ready to tear him apart for what he did to you, to me, to all of us. But when he opened the door and I saw his face... H.J. paused, struggling for words. He looked at me like I was the most precious thing he'd ever seen, like he'd been waiting his whole life for me to knock on that door, and before I could say anything, he just started crying and saying he was sorry, over and over. "I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry." He called you son? Yeah, for the first time ever. And Mama, I wanted to hate him. I really did. I wanted to tell him he had no right to call me that he wasn't my father, that Harold Patterson was my daddy and always would be. But... He trailed off. But what? But Harold Patterson wasn't my daddy? Not really. And standing there looking at Jimmy Ray, seeing my own face looking back at me, I couldn't pretend anymore. H.J. told me they talked for hours that day. Jimmy Ray told him everything, the whole story, from the beginning. How he and Harold had fallen in love as teenagers, how they'd hidden their relationship for decades, how they'd made the terrible decision to deceive Linda and me, to build families on top of lies, to steal Saturdays and pretend that was enough. He told H.J. about the night I couldn't remember, the night they drugged me, the night H.J. was conceived. That was the hardest part to hear, H.J. admitted, knowing how I came into this world, knowing what they did to you, Mama. It makes me sick to my stomach. It makes me sick too, I said honestly. But it's not your fault. None of this is your fault. You didn't ask to be born this way. I know, but I'm a product of something evil, something wrong. I reached across the table and grabbed his hand. You are not a product of something evil, Harold Eugene. You are my son, my firstborn, the baby I held in my arms and loved from the first moment I saw you. How you got here doesn't change that. It doesn't change who you are or what you mean to me. He squeezed my hand back, tears welling up in his eyes again. I don't know if I can forgive them, Mama. Either of them. Daddy, Harold, whoever he was, and Jimmy Ray. I don't know if I can ever look at them the same way. Harold's dead, I said simply. You can't forgive a dead man. And Jimmy Ray, that's your choice to make. But I'll tell you something I've learned these past 6 months. Forgiveness isn't about them. It's about you. It's about deciding whether you want to carry that anger around for the rest of your life, or whether you want to set it down and move on. Have you forgiven them? I thought about that for a long moment. I don't know, I admitted. Some days I think I have. Some days the rage comes back so strong I can barely breathe. But I'm working on it, because I spent 44 years being miserable, and I'll be damned if I'm going to spend whatever time I've got left being miserable too. H.J. stayed for dinner that night. I made his favorite, fried catfish with hush puppies and coleslaw, just like I used to make when he was a boy. We ate at the kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing, slowly finding our way back to each other. Before he left, he told me something that surprised me. I'm going to keep seeing Jimmy Ray, he said. Not because I forgive him, not because I'm okay with what he did, but because he's my father, my biological father, and I have questions. Decades worth of questions about who I am, where I come from, what parts of me are his. I need answers, Mama, even if I don't like what I find. I understood. I didn't like it, but I understood. What about his relationship with you? HJ asked. Jimmy Ray, I mean. Are you ever going to speak to him again? No. The word came out flat and final. Whatever he needs to work out with you, that's between the two of you. But I've said everything I need to say to Jimmy Ray Dawson. I've got nothing left for that man but silence. HJ nodded slowly, nodded. I respect that, Mama, and I'm sorry. For disappearing for 6 months, for not calling, for making you worry. You needed time, I understand. Still, I should have at least let you know I was alive. You're here now. That's what matters. He hugged me again at the door, longer this time, tighter. And when he pulled back, there was something different in his eyes. Not peace exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby. Always have, always will. I watched him walk to his truck, climb in, and drive away. And for the first time in 6 months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. After HJ left, I sat on my porch swing and watched the sun go down. The past 6 months had been the hardest of my life, harder than the years of loneliness in my marriage. Harder than the moment I found those letters, even harder than the confrontation with Jimmy Ray. Because in those 6 months, I hadn't just lost my husband. I'd lost my past. Every memory, every moment, everything I thought I knew about my life, it had all been rewritten, recontextualized, revealed as a lie. But I'd also gained something. I'd gained the truth. For the first time in 68 years, I knew exactly where I stood. No more guessing, no more wondering, no more lying awake at night asking God what was wrong with me. Nothing was wrong with me. There never had been. The problem was Harold. The problem was a world that told 2 men they couldn't love each other openly, so they had to hide and lie and destroy innocent people in the process. The problem was a church that preached love but practiced shame. The problem was a culture that valued appearances over authenticity, silence over truth. I'd been a casualty of all of it, but I wasn't going to be a casualty anymore. The next Sunday, I did something I'd never done before in my entire life. I didn't go to church. Just didn't go. Woke up, made coffee, sat on my porch in my bathrobe, and watched the church folks drive by on their way to First Baptist. 47 years of Sundays, and I just stopped. Because I realized that church wasn't where I found God. Church was where I learned to be quiet, to accept, to obey a man who was lying to me every single day, to smile and say, I'm blessed when my heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. I didn't need that anymore. I didn't want it. If God was real, and I still believed he was, then he wasn't in that building with its stained glass windows and its hypocrite deacons. He was out here, in the sunrise, in the birds singing, in the truth, however painful it might be. I finished my coffee, went inside, and started planning my new life. The first thing I did was sell Harold's truck. That old Ford F-150 had been sitting in my driveway for 6 months, just collecting dust and pine needles. Harold had loved that truck more than he'd ever loved me, spent every weekend washing it, waxing it, talking about it like it was a member of the family. I called a dealership in town and had them come pick it up. They gave me $8,000 for it, which was probably less than it was worth, but I didn't care. I just wanted it gone. Wanted every trace of Harold Eugene Patterson out of my life. After the truck, I went through the house room by room, getting rid of everything that belonged to him. His clothes went to Goodwill. His fishing rods went to Tommy. His tools, including that toolbox with the false bottom, went to HJ, though I made sure to remove the letters first. The letters I kept. Not because I wanted to read them again. Lord knows, once was enough. But because they were evidence. Proof that I wasn't crazy. That everything I'd experienced was real. Someday, maybe, I'd burn them. But not yet. I took his name off the mailbox, off the bank accounts, off the house deed. Dorothy Mae Patterson became Dorothy Mae Wilson again, taking back my maiden name for the first time in 44 years. It felt like shedding a skin, like crawling out of a costume I'd been wearing so long I'd forgotten it wasn't really me. The church ladies noticed I'd stopped coming to Sunday service. At first, they were understanding. Poor Dot's still grieving, they said. She'll come back when she's ready. But after a month, the phone calls started. Dorothy, we missed you at service this week. Is everything all right? Dot, honey, Pastor Williams is worried about you. He'd love to come by for a visit. Sister Dorothy, we're praying for you. The devil uses grief to pull us away from God's house. I let most of the calls go to voicemail. The ones I answered, I kept short. I'm fine, just need some time. But the truth was, I wasn't going back. Not ever. I'd spent 47 years sitting in those pews, listening to sermons about honesty and integrity and living a godly life. And the whole time, my husband, the church's beloved deacon, was living a double life. Lying to everyone, including the God he claimed to serve. And nobody noticed. Nobody questioned. They were too busy praising Brother Harold, too busy telling me how blessed I was, too busy worrying about appearances to see what was right in front of their faces. I was done with all of it. Done with the hypocrisy, the judgment, the rules that kept women small and silent. If that made me a sinner in their eyes, so be it. I'd rather be an honest sinner than a lying saint. About 2 months after I stopped going to church, I did something I'd never done in my entire life. I took a vacation. By myself. Now, you have to understand, women of my generation didn't do things like that. We didn't travel alone. We didn't spend money on ourselves. We didn't prioritize our own happiness over our duties to our families and our homes. But I was 68 years old, and I'd just discovered that my entire life had been a lie. If there was ever a time to break the rules, this was it. I booked a little cottage down in Gulf Shores for a week. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom place with a kitchenette and a view of the water. I packed a suitcase with sundresses and sandals, threw my romance novels in the back seat, and drove south. 3 hours later, I was standing on the beach with my toes in the sand, watching the waves roll in and crying like a baby. But they weren't sad tears. Not exactly. They were release tears. Decades of pain and loneliness and disappointment all coming out at once. I stood there and cried until I didn't have any tears left, until I was empty. And then I took a deep breath of that salty Gulf air, and I started to fill back up. That week in Gulf Shores changed me. Every morning, I'd wake up with the sun and walk along the beach. Just me and the seagulls and the early morning fishermen casting their lines into the surf. I'd pick up shells, let the waves wash over my feet, watch the pelicans dive for their breakfast. I'd never realized how much I needed silence. Real silence, not the heavy, suffocating silence of my marriage. This silence was different, peaceful, healing. It was the silence of being alone by choice, not by neglect. During the days, I'd sit on my little porch and read. I must have gone through 4 or 5 novels that week, all those romance stories I'd been secretly devouring for years. Stories about women who found love late in life, who discovered passion after they'd given up hope, who learned that it was never too late to start over. I used to read those books and think they were fantasies, fairy tales for lonely old women who needed something to dream about. Now I wondered if maybe they were instructions. On my 4th night in Gulf Shores, I went out to dinner by myself. That might not sound like a big deal, but for a woman of my generation, eating alone at a restaurant was practically scandalous. Nice women didn't do that. Nice women stayed home or went out with their husbands or their church groups. They didn't sit at tables by themselves like they had nobody in the world who cared about them. But I wanted to try the seafood place everybody kept talking about, and I didn't have anybody to go with. So I just went. The hostess looked at me funny when I said, "Table for one." But she seated me by the window with a view of the water, and I ordered fried shrimp and a glass of white wine and watched the sunset paint the sky pink and orange and gold. And you know what? It was one of the best meals I'd ever had. Not because the food was amazing, though it was pretty good, but because I'd chosen it. I'd decided what I wanted, where I wanted to be, what I wanted to eat. Nobody else had made those decisions for me. For the first time in my life, I was living on my own terms. When I got home from Gulf Shores, I started making changes. I'd been living in that same house for over 40 years. The house where I'd raised my children, cooked 10,000 meals, spent 10,000 lonely nights. Every room held memories, and not many of them were good. So I decided to sell it. Betsy thought I was crazy. "Mama, that's our family home. You can't just get rid of it." "Watch me," I said. I called a realtor, got the house appraised, and put it on the market. It sold in 3 weeks. A young couple from Montgomery, expecting their first baby. They looked so happy when they walked through, pointing out where they'd put the nursery, where they'd have family dinners, all the memories they were going to make. I hoped their memories would be better than mine. With the money from the sale, I bought myself a little apartment on the other side of town. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a nice balcony overlooking a park with a pond. Small, simple, easy to maintain. Mine. The day I moved in, I sat on my new balcony and watched the ducks swimming in the pond below. I thought about Harold, about Jimmy Ray, about all the years I'd wasted, and then I let those thoughts float away, like leaves on the water. The past was the past. I couldn't change it, but the future? That was still mine to write. It was about 6 months after I moved into my new apartment that I met Walter. I wasn't looking for anybody, Lord knows. The last thing I wanted was another man in my life. I'd had enough of men and their lies and their secrets to last me a lifetime. But there I was at the public library, returning some books and looking for new ones, when I noticed this gentleman sitting in the children's section reading "Good Night Moon" to a group of toddlers. He had silver hair and kind eyes and a voice like warm honey. The children were hanging on his every word, and so were the mothers sitting around the edges, watching with soft smiles on their faces. When story time ended, he looked up and caught me staring. I must have turned red as a tomato because he laughed, a nice laugh, not mocking, and walked over to where I was standing. "Can I help you find something?" he asked. "I'm just browsing," I stammered. "I didn't mean to stare. You're very good with the children." He smiled. "I volunteer here 3 days a week. Retired last year. Needed something to do with myself. My wife passed a few years back, and the house was getting too quiet." "I'm sorry for your loss," I said automatically. "Thank you. I'm sorry for yours." I blinked. "How did you know I lost someone?" He shrugged gently. "You've got that look, the one widows get when they're still figuring out who they are without their other half." Something about the way he said it, no pity, no judgment, just understanding, made me want to keep talking to him. So when he asked if I'd like to get a cup of coffee from the little cafe in the library, I surprised myself by saying yes. His name was Walter. He was 58 years old, 10 years younger than me, which would have scandalized the church ladies if they'd known. He'd been a high school history teacher for 30 years, had 2 grown daughters in Birmingham, and had been widowed for 5 years. We talked for 2 hours that first day, about books, about life, about loss. He didn't ask too many questions about Harold, and I didn't volunteer too much information. There would be time for that later. Or maybe not. Maybe I didn't owe anyone my whole story anymore. When we finally stood up to leave, Walter asked if he could see me again. "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. Walter and I took things slow. And I mean slow, honey. Slower than any courtship I'd ever heard of. But after everything I'd been through, slow was exactly what I needed. Our first few dates were just coffee at the library cafe. We'd sit there for hours, talking about everything under the sun. He told me about his teaching career, about his late wife Margaret, who died of breast cancer, about his daughters who were both married now with children of their own. I told him about working at Walmart, about raising 3 kids, about the loneliness I'd felt for most of my adult life. I didn't tell him about Harold. Not the truth, anyway. Not yet. After a few weeks, coffee turned into lunch. There was a little sandwich shop around the corner from the library, and we started meeting there every Tuesday and Thursday. He'd order the club sandwich, I'd get the chicken salad, and we'd talk until the lunch rush cleared out and the waitress started giving us looks. Then lunch turned into dinner. Nothing fancy, Cracker Barrel mostly, or sometimes that seafood place out by the highway. He'd pick me up at my apartment, hold the door open for me, pull out my chair at the restaurant. Old-fashioned manners that made me feel like I was being courted for the first time in my life. Because I was, really. Harold had never courted me. We'd gone from church picnic to engagement in 3 months, and the whole time I felt like I was being evaluated, not pursued. Like he was checking boxes on a list rather than falling in love. With Walter, it was different. With Walter, I felt wanted. About 2 months into our whatever it was, Walter invited me to his house for dinner. "I make a mean spaghetti," he said with that warm smile of his. "My daughters say it's the only thing I cook that's actually edible." I hesitated. Going to a man's house, alone, at my age, that was a big step. The church ladies would have had a field day if they found out. But then I remembered that I didn't care what the church ladies thought anymore. Hadn't cared for months. "I'd love to," I said. His house was a modest ranch-style place in a quiet neighborhood on the west side of town. Not too different from the house I'd sold, except it felt warmer somehow. Lived in. There were books everywhere, on shelves, on tables, stacked on the floor. Family photos covered the walls. An old golden retriever named Biscuit greeted me at the door with a wagging tail. Walter wasn't lying about the spaghetti. It was delicious. Homemade sauce with Italian sausage, garlic bread that was crispy on the outside and soft in the middle. A simple salad on the side. We ate at his kitchen table with candles lit, like teenagers on a date. After dinner, we moved to the living room. He put on some old records, Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, the music our generation grew up with, and we sat on his couch and talked some more. At some point, he reached over and took my hand. I froze. It had been so long since a man had touched me with any kind of intention. So long since I'd felt that little spark of electricity that comes from skin touching skin. I'd forgotten what it felt like, or maybe I'd never really known. "Is this okay?" Walter asked softly. I looked at him, really looked at him, at his kind eyes, his gentle smile, the silver hair that curled slightly at his temples, at this man who'd spent 2 months getting to know me, who'd never pushed, never pressured, never made me feel anything but comfortable and valued. "Yes," I whispered. "It's okay." He squeezed my hand and smiled, and we just sat there like that, holding hands like a couple of school kids, listening to Frank Sinatra sing about the way you look tonight. It was another month before he kissed me. We were on his porch, saying goodnight after another dinner at his place. The moon was full, the air was warm, and the fireflies were blinking in his front yard like tiny Christmas lights. "Dot," he said, and there was something different in his voice, something careful, almost nervous. "I need to tell you something." My heart clenched. Here it comes, I thought. The catch. The secret. The lie. Because there was always a lie, wasn't there? Always something hiding behind the nice words and the gentle touches. "What is it?" I braced myself for the worst. "I'm falling in love with you." I stared at him. Of all the things I'd expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. "I know it might be too soon," he continued, rushing the words out like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve. "And I know we're not young anymore, and maybe love is something for kids, not for folks our age. But I can't help it, Dot. You're the most interesting, strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever met, and I kissed him. I didn't plan it, didn't think about it. Just leaned forward and pressed my lips to his, cutting off whatever else he was going to say. It was a short kiss, soft, almost chaste. But honey, I felt it all the way down to my toes. When I pulled back, Walter was smiling like he'd won the lottery. "Well," he said, "I wasn't expecting that." "Neither was I admitted. He laughed, that warm, easy laugh I'd grown to love, and kissed me again. This time it was longer, deeper, the kind of kiss I'd read about in all those romance novels, but never actually experienced. At 69 years old, I finally understood what all the fuss was about. I knew I had to tell him the truth about Harold. It wasn't fair to keep it from him, especially now that things were getting serious between us. He deserved to know who I really was, what I'd really been through. And I needed to know if he could handle it, if he could love a woman with a past as complicated and painful as mine. So one night, sitting on his couch after dinner, I told him everything. I told him about Harold's supposed impotence, about the 44 years without intimacy, about finding the letters and Jimmy Ray's confession, and the horrible truth about how HJ was conceived. I told him about the DNA test, about my son's struggles to accept his real father, about my decision to leave the church and sell the house and start over. I talked for almost 2 hours straight. Walter didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, didn't react at all except to hold my hand tighter when the story got hard. When I finished, I was exhausted, wrung out like a dish rag. I'd never told anyone the whole story from beginning to end, and doing it had taken more out of me than I expected. "Well," I said, trying to make a joke of it, "now you know. I come with a lot of baggage." Walter was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over and cupped my face in his hands, gently, like I was something precious. "Dorothy Mae Wilson," he said, "you are the bravest woman I have ever known." I started crying, couldn't help it. After everything I'd been through, after all the shame and the secrets and the silence, here was this man calling me brave. "I'm not brave," I said through my tears. "I was a fool. I let them lie to me for 44 years. You trusted your husband. That's not foolish. That's faithful. What they did to you was monstrous. But you survived it. You found out the truth, and you faced it, and you rebuilt your life from scratch. That takes courage, Dot. More courage than most people have." He wiped my tears with his thumbs, then pulled me into his arms and held me tight. "I'm not going anywhere," he murmured into my hair. "If you'll have me, I'm right here, for as long as you want me." "What if I want you for a long time?" I whispered. "Then you've got me for a long time. I'd like to tell you that our first night together was graceful and romantic, like something out of those novels I read. It wasn't. We were both nervous, both out of practice, both carrying decades of loss and loneliness into that bedroom with us. There were awkward moments, fumbling hands, self-conscious laughs about bodies that weren't what they used to be. But there was also tenderness, patience, a willingness to go slow, to figure things out together, to make mistakes and try again. And when it was over, when we were lying in his bed, wrapped in each other's arms, catching our breath, I felt something I'd never felt before in my entire life. Complete. That's the only word for it. For 68 years, there had been a hole inside me, a place that was always empty, always aching, always wondering what was wrong with me, why I wasn't enough. And in that moment, with this gentle man beside me, the hole was finally filled. I started crying again. Couldn't seem to stop crying these days. "Did I hurt you?" Walter asked, alarmed. "Was it too much? I knew we should have waited." "No," I said, laughing through my tears. "No, honey, you didn't hurt me. I'm happy. For the first time I can remember, I'm actually happy." He relaxed and pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to my forehead. "Get used to it," he said. I plan to make you happy for a very long time." The next morning, I woke up in Walter's bed with sunlight streaming through the curtains and the smell of coffee drifting in from the kitchen. I lay there for a moment, disoriented. It had been 44 years since I'd woken up next to a man who actually wanted me there, who wasn't already turned away, already up and gone, already pretending I didn't exist. I got up, wrapped myself in Walter's bathrobe, it was too big, hung down past my knees, and padded out to the kitchen. He was standing at the stove, making pancakes. Biscuit was at his feet, hoping for scraps. When he heard me come in, he turned around and smiled. "Good morning, beautiful." Beautiful. He called me beautiful. Nobody had ever called me beautiful. Not Harold, not my mother, not anyone. I was always pretty enough, or fine for her age, or not bad for having 3 kids. But beautiful? Never. "Good morning yourself," I said, feeling suddenly shy. He crossed the kitchen and kissed me. A real kiss, a morning after kiss. And I felt that spark again. That warmth spreading through my chest like sunshine. "Sit down," he said. "Breakfast is almost ready." So I sat at his kitchen table, in his bathrobe, drinking his coffee, eating his pancakes, like it was the most normal thing in the world, like I'd been doing it my whole life. And I thought, this is what it could have been. This is what love is supposed to feel like. I'd wasted 44 years on a man who didn't want me, but I wasn't going to waste another minute. Whatever time I had left, I was going to spend it being happy. It's been 2 years now since I found those letters. 2 years since my whole world fell apart, and I had to rebuild it from scratch. 2 years since I learned that the man I'd been married to for 44 years was a stranger, that my oldest son wasn't who I thought he was, that everything I believed about my life was a lie. And you know what? I've never been happier. I know that sounds strange, maybe even impossible. How can someone go through what I went through and come out the other side happy? But honey, it's the truth. At 70 years old, I'm finally living the life I was meant to live. Walter and I are still together. We never got married. Neither of us saw the point. We'd both done the marriage thing, both been through the "till death do us part" promise, and we didn't need a piece of paper or a preacher's blessing to make what we had real. What we have is better than any marriage I've ever seen. We don't live together, not officially. He's got his house, I've got my apartment. But most nights we're at one place or the other, cooking dinner together, watching old movies, falling asleep in each other's arms. On weekends, we take little trips down to Gulf Shores, over to New Orleans, up to the mountains in Tennessee when the leaves are changing. Last summer, we drove all the way to the Grand Canyon. Just packed up his car and went, like a couple of kids on a road trip. I'd never seen it before, never been west of Texas in my whole life. When I stood at that rim and looked out at all that red and orange rock stretching to the horizon, I started crying. Not sad tears, wonder tears. 70 years old, and I was still seeing things for the first time. Walter held my hand and didn't say anything. He knew. He always knows. My relationship with my children has changed, of course. Betsy and I are closer than ever. She calls me every Sunday afternoon, comes over for dinner at least once a month. She's the one who helped me find my apartment, who went furniture shopping with me, who held my hand through all those terrible months when I was still reeling from the discovery. "I'm proud of you, Mama," she told me recently. "I know this sounds weird to say to your own mother, but I really am. You could have fallen apart. You could have crawled into a hole and never come out, but you didn't. You rebuilt your whole life at 68 years old. That takes guts." I hugged her so tight she squeaked. Tommy is doing well too. He's still in Atlanta, still doing whatever it is he does with computers. He calls every couple of weeks, sends me pictures of restaurants he's tried, tech gadgets I don't understand. He's always been the quiet one, the one who shows love through actions rather than words. But I know he cares. I know he's there if I need him. And HJ? Well, that's more complicated. HJ and I are talking again, which is more than I could say for a while there. After that first visit, when he came to tell me about the DNA test, Things were rocky for a long time. He was angry. Not at me, exactly, but at the situation, at Harold, at Jimmy Ray, at the universe for making his life so complicated. And sometimes that anger spilled over onto me, because I was the one who delivered the news, the one who'd shattered his understanding of who he was. But time has a way of healing things, even the deep wounds. He's been seeing a therapist. Can you imagine a Patterson man going to therapy? Harold would have rolled over in his grave. But it's helped HJ a lot. Helped him process the anger, the grief, the confusion of learning that his whole identity was built on lies. He's also been spending time with Jimmy Ray. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't hurt. It does. Every time HJ mentions that he went fishing with Jimmy Ray, or had dinner at his house, or helped him fix something in his yard, I feel a twist in my gut. This is the man who violated me, who helped Harold steal 44 years of my life. And now my son is building a relationship with him, but I've made my peace with it. Or I'm trying to anyway, because HJ didn't ask for any of this. He didn't choose to be born the way he was born, didn't choose to have Jimmy Ray as his biological father. He's just trying to figure out who he is, where he comes from, what parts of himself belong to which man. And if that means having a relationship with Jimmy Ray, then that's his choice to make. I don't have to like it, but I don't have to stand in the way of it either. As for Jimmy Ray himself, I haven't spoken to him since that day I showed up at his house with the shoebox. I see him sometimes around town. Mobile isn't that big. You can't avoid someone forever. He goes to a different grocery store now, probably to avoid running into me at the Piggly Wiggly. But every once in a while, our paths cross. Last month, I saw him at the hardware store. He was behind the counter, ringing up some customer, and he looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Two old people with too much history between us, too much pain, too much that could never be undone. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but I just turned around and walked out. There's nothing left to say, nothing that would make any difference. He knows what he did. I know what he did, and no amount of apologies or explanations will give me back the 44 years he helped steal from me. I've chosen to move forward, not backward, and that means leaving Jimmy Ray Dawson in my past, where he belongs. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry at Harold. It's a complicated question. For a long time, I was furious. Furious at the lies, at the deception, at the way he used me as a cover for his real life. I'd lie awake at night imagining all the things I would have said to him if he'd still been alive, all the questions I would have demanded answers to. But you can't stay angry at a dead man forever. It's like screaming into a void. The void doesn't care, and all you're doing is hurting your own throat. So I've tried to let go of the anger. Not for Harold's sake, he doesn't deserve my forgiveness, but for my own. Because carrying that rage around was poisoning me, eating me up from the inside, keeping me stuck in the past when I wanted so badly to move forward. Now, when I think about Harold, what I mostly feel is sad. Sad for the life he couldn't live. Sad that he was born in a time and place where being who he really was could get him killed. Sad that he felt like he had no choice but to lie and hide and hurt innocent people just to survive. I'm not excusing what he did. There's no excuse for using another human being the way he used me. But I can understand, at least a little bit, how terrified he must have been, how trapped he must have felt, how impossible his situation must have seemed. He made terrible choices, unforgivable choices, but he made them in a world that gave him no good options. The church still talks about him like he was a saint, you know. Brother Harold, the faithful deacon, the man who served the Lord for 40 years. They've got a memorial plaque for him in the fellowship hall, right next to the one for Pastor William's father. Sometimes I think about going in there and telling them the truth. Standing up in the middle of Sunday service and announcing that their beloved brother Harold was living a double life, that he was gay, that he used his wife as a cover story while he carried on a 40-year affair with his best friend. But I never do. Partly because I don't want to hurt HJ any more than he's already been hurt. Partly because I don't think it would change anything. People believe what they want to believe, and they'd probably just call me a bitter old widow making up lies. But mostly because I just don't care anymore. What those church people think of Harold, what they think of me, what they think of anything, it doesn't matter. Their opinions don't pay my bills, don't warm my bed, don't make my life better or worse in any meaningful way. I spent 68 years caring what other people thought, dressing the way they expected, talking the way they expected, living the way they expected. And where did it get me? Married to a man who couldn't love me, sitting in a church that valued appearances over truth, trapped in a life that wasn't really mine. No more. These days, my life is simple, and I mean that as the highest compliment. I wake up when I want to wake up. No alarm, no schedule, no obligations dragging me out of bed before I'm ready. I make my coffee, sit on my balcony, watch the ducks on the pond. I read my books, I take my walks, I meet Walter for lunch or dinner or whatever we feel like doing. Twice a week, I volunteer at the library, helping with the children's reading program that Walter started. Those kids don't care that I'm 70 years old, don't care about my past or my pain. They just want someone to read them stories and help them sound out words. It's the most rewarding thing I've ever done. On Sundays, I have dinner with Betsy. On Wednesdays, I video chat with Tommy. Once a month, HJ comes down from Birmingham and we go out for catfish at that place he likes on the causeway. It's not a glamorous life. It's not the life I imagined when I was a young woman dreaming about my future. But it's real. It's honest. It's mine. And after 44 years of living someone else's lie, that's worth more than all the glamour in the world. The other day, I was going through some old photos and I found our wedding picture. Me and Harold, standing on the steps of First Baptist Church, young and hopeful and completely clueless about what was coming. I looked at that girl in the white dress, so young, so innocent, so desperate to do everything right, and I wanted to reach through time and shake her. Run, I wanted to say. Run away from this man, from this church, from everything they're telling you a woman is supposed to be. You deserve better. You deserve the truth. But I couldn't reach her, couldn't warn her, couldn't save her from the 44 years of loneliness that were waiting for her. All I could do was save myself. And that's exactly what I did. I put the photo back in the box. Maybe I'll throw it away someday. Maybe I'll keep it as a reminder of how far I've come. Either way, it doesn't define me anymore. Nothing does, except the choices I make right now, in this moment, with whatever time I have left. And right now, I choose to be happy. So here I am, honey. 70 years old, sitting in my little apartment with the ducks on the pond, telling my story to strangers on the internet. If you told me 5 years ago that I'd be doing this, airing my dirty laundry for the whole world to see, I would have laughed in your face. Dorothy Mae Patterson didn't talk about her problems. Dorothy Mae Patterson smiled and said, "I'm blessed," and kept her mouth shut like a good Christian woman. But I'm not Dorothy Mae Patterson anymore. I'm Dorothy Mae Wilson. And Dorothy Mae Wilson is done being quiet. I've been thinking a lot lately about why I wanted to tell this story. Part of it is selfish, I'll admit. There's something healing about saying the words out loud, about taking this thing that lived in the dark for so long and dragging it into the light. Every time I tell it, it loses a little bit of its power over me. The shame gets smaller. The anger gets softer. The wound starts to close. But that's not the main reason. The main reason is you. You, whoever you are, watching this video right now. Maybe you're my age, maybe you're younger, maybe you're married, maybe you're single, maybe you're somewhere in between. Maybe your life is perfect and you're just here for the drama. But maybe, just maybe, something in my story sounds familiar. Maybe you're lying in bed next to someone who hasn't touched you in years. Maybe you're making excuses for a husband who's never really present, who's always somewhere else in his head, who makes you feel like you're the problem, when deep down you know something isn't right. Maybe you've spent years, decades, a lifetime wondering what's wrong with you, why you're not pretty enough, thin enough, interesting enough, desirable enough, why the person who promised to love and cherish you treats you like furniture, useful, but not something you'd ever notice unless it wasn't there. If that's you, honey, I need you to hear something. It's not you. It was never you. I spent 44 years thinking I was broken. 44 years of looking in the mirror and hating what I saw. Of lying awake at night, asking God what I'd done wrong, why he'd cursed me with a husband who didn't want me. Of reading those romance novels and crying because I knew I'd never have what those fictional women had: passion, desire, a man who couldn't keep his hands off her. I thought I was unlovable. I thought I was defective. I thought maybe this was just what marriage was for women like me: quiet suffering, graceful acceptance, making the best of a bad situation. It took finding those letters, finding out the terrible, devastating truth, for me to finally understand. There was nothing wrong with me. There never had been. The problem wasn't my body, my personality, my desirability. The problem was that I'd married a man who was incapable of wanting me, not because of diabetes or illness or God's will, but because I was the wrong gender entirely. I was a beard, a cover story, a convenient excuse so nobody would look too closely at the bachelor mechanic who spent all his time with his best friend. And I wasted 44 years believing his lies. Now, I want to be careful here, because I know this is a sensitive subject. I don't hate gay people. I don't think there's anything wrong with being gay. If Harold and Jimmy Ray had been born in a different time, a different place, they could have been together openly. They could have lived their truth without hurting anyone. But they weren't born in a different time. They were born in Mobile, Alabama, in the 1950s, when being gay could get you killed. And instead of finding another way, instead of staying single, or being honest with the women they married, or moving somewhere they could be themselves, they chose to lie. They chose to use Linda and me as human shields. They chose to build families on top of deception. They chose their own comfort and safety over our right to know the truth about our own lives. That's what I can't forgive. Not the gayness, the lying, the decades of calculated, deliberate, systematic deception that stole the best years of my life. Harold had a choice. He could have told me the truth before we got married. He could have let me go so I could find someone who actually wanted me. Instead, he kept me trapped in a loveless marriage for 44 years, letting me blame myself the whole time. That wasn't love. That wasn't even basic human decency. That was cruelty dressed up in church clothes. I know some of you are wondering about the church, about my faith, about whether I still believe in God after everything that happened. The honest answer is, I don't know. I believe in something. Some force in the universe that's bigger than us, that connects us all, that gives meaning to the chaos of human existence. Whether that's the Baptist God I grew up with, or something else entirely, I couldn't tell you. What I don't believe in anymore is the version of God that the church taught me. The God who wanted women to be silent and obedient. The God who blessed men like Harold while ignoring the suffering of their wives. The God who cared more about appearances than truth, more about tradition than justice, more about keeping up the show than actually helping people. That God can go to hell as far as I'm concerned. If there's a real God out there, and I think there probably is, I believe he's in the kindness we show each other, in the love between two people who actually want to be together, in the courage it takes to tell the truth, even when the truth is ugly and painful and hard. Walter says God is in the sunrise and the ocean and the laughter of children. I think he might be right. I think God is in all the beautiful, honest things in this world, and he's nowhere near the hypocrites who use his name to control and deceive. So what's the lesson here? What do I want you to take away from my story? I've thought about this a lot, and I think it comes down to a few things. First, trust your gut. If something feels wrong in your relationship, it probably is. If your husband is distant, secretive, always somewhere else in his mind, pay attention to that. Don't make excuses for him. Don't blame yourself. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you that you're crazy or paranoid or ungrateful. I ignored my instincts for 44 years. I told myself I was being silly, that Harold was a good man, that I should count my blessings and stop complaining. And the whole time, my gut was screaming that something wasn't right. Listen to that voice, honey. It's trying to save you. Second, you deserve the truth. I don't care how long you've been married, how old you are, how much you've invested in your relationship. You deserve to know who you're really with. You deserve honesty, transparency, a partner who shows you their true self instead of a carefully constructed mask. If someone is hiding things from you, big things, things that affect your life, that's not protecting you. That's controlling you, and you don't have to accept it. Third, it's never too late. I found out the truth at 68 years old. I started over at 68 years old. I found love, real love, the kind I'd only read about in books, at 69 years old. If I can do it, so can you. I don't care if you're 50, 60, 70, 80. I don't care if you've been married for decades, if you've never lived alone, if you can't imagine starting over. You can. You absolutely can. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. But it's possible. Your life is not over. Your story is not finished. There are chapters left to write, and you get to decide what they say. I'm going to leave you with something my mama used to say. She wasn't a perfect woman, my mama. She taught me a lot of things that I've had to unlearn, about obedience, about silence, about what a woman's place is supposed to be. But she also taught me this. Dorothy Ann, the sun don't shine on the same dog's tail every day. What she meant was, things change. Bad times don't last forever. The dog that's getting burned today might be lying in the shade tomorrow. You just have to hold on long enough to see it. For 44 years, I was that dog lying in the sun, getting burned, wondering if the shade would ever come. Now I'm 70 years old, and I'm finally in the shade. Finally at peace. Finally living a life that's actually mine. The sun don't shine on the same dog's tail every day, honey. Your shade is coming. I promise you that. All right, I've talked your ear off long enough. If you made it all the way to the end of this story, I want to thank you, truly. It means more than you know that you'd spend this time with an old woman from Alabama listening to her ramble about her messed up life. And now I've got a favor to ask. If this story meant something to you, if it made you think, made you feel, made you look at your own life a little differently, I want to hear from you. Leave me a comment down below. Tell me where you're watching from, what part of the story hit you hardest, whether you've been through anything similar. Tell me about your own journey, your own struggles, your own shade that you're still waiting for. Because we're not alone in this, honey. None of us are. There are millions of women out there who've been through what I've been through, who've survived what I've survived, who are still fighting their way toward the lives they deserve. And when we share our stories, when we lift each other up, when we remind each other that it's never too late to start over, that's when we're strongest. That's when we heal. That's when we finally break free from all the lies and the silence and the shame. So hit that like button. Leave that comment. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're lying in bed tonight next to someone who makes you feel invisible, someone who's never really there, someone who's hiding something behind those church-going smiles and Bible verses, I want you to remember my story. Remember that you deserve better. Remember that the truth will set you free, even when it hurts. Remember that it's never too late to start living. My name is Dorothy Mae Wilson. I'm 70 years old, I live in Mobile, Alabama, and this has been my story. Thank you for listening. Bless your heart and bless your journey. Now go find your truth, honey. It's waiting for you.